Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Nikki2Jobs here. Today I wanted to go over an article that I found online, 10 communication strategies to better engage candidates. It's written by RecruitingDaily.com. I'll have it linked in the description below so you can check it out for yourself, but I thought there was a lot of good information in there, so let's get started. Starting here with maintaining transparency and regular check-ins. This recruitment consultant is recommending to make sure that you check in with candidates on a consistent basis, sometimes even if you don't have anything to actually reach out about. I do think that there are times where it is a good practice to reach out to a candidate, even if you don't have something to update them with. However, this can backfire on you because you don't want to necessarily get their hopes up with a hiring decision if you don't actually have one. It all depends on the relationship that you have with the candidate. However, the general sentiment of making sure that you're having transparency and consistent communication with the candidate is very important. It's going to help you build that relationship. This next one is along the same lines, implement micro communication tactics. They're talking mainly about the same concept. And while I do agree that you want to make sure that you're transparent and maintaining updates with the candidate, it depends also where you're at in the interview process. If you're deeper in the interview process with a candidate, you certainly want to share any updates that you can. You also want to be able to update yourself on what interview process they may be having as well, so you can keep your hiring managers updated on that. There is a very fine line between wanting to provide all the information you can and providing too much information. We have to remember, although these candidates may be interviewing with us, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's their entire life. They may have jobs of their own, responsibilities of their own, and to be getting multiple communications a day can actually be overwhelming. This next one is sending immediate post-call summaries after you speak with a candidate. I'll admit this isn't something that I've thought about in every scenario. However, it is a great opportunity to make sure that you're fully engaging the candidate. You're writing them a bit of a synopsis of what your phone call was all about. Where I feel this makes the most sense is if you go over interview prep with a candidate, it's great to then send a documented form of the interview prep that you went over with them, so they don't have to rely on taking notes while you're on the call, and they'll be able to have that information to look at whenever they want. This next one is going to be talking about automating initial outreaches and follow-ups. I definitely recommend that this can be a good time saver if you have a good enough tool to make sure that even if you are automating some messages, they're not going to come off as automated. Depending on how high volume you are, it's very difficult to make sure that you're sending individualized messages every single time. However, if you are working more on specialist profiles, you want to make sure that your reach outs reflect this candidate's specific experience, and you're only going to be able to do that by going over their profile before you send out the reach out, and make sure that you include specific experience that they have as to why they're a good match for the role. Receiving an obvious automated email can come off as insulting to candidates. So you just want to make sure you're being as careful and thoughtful as you can if you're doing that method. But I also agree with them. This method can open up more time for you to send personalized messages for things that matter the most, like interview feedback, rejection letters, and next steps. This next strategy is to update candidates on their application status. This is very important. If a candidate has applied to a position, they'll usually get an automated email confirming their application. There's usually not much communication beyond that until they either understand whether they'll be considered for the position or are rejected from the position. So being able to provide an update on this as soon as possible is definitely going to create a good image for your company and its recruiting process. Providing timely feedback is the next one. This is pretty obvious. However, I know that it's something that some recruiters lack because I see candidates talking about it all the time. If a candidate interviews with your company or your client, you should definitely be getting feedback to them as soon as possible. Now, there are caveats to this. In my experience, sometimes it takes me a long time just to get feedback from the interviewers. So it's not always on the recruiter for not being able to provide timely feedback, but when you do get it, you should be sending it over as soon as you can. Nobody wants to be waiting forever to hear how they performed in anything, much less an interview. But I will tell you that sometimes I've been even more impatient to find out interview feedback for one of my candidates than the actual candidate themselves. This next strategy of being honest and building trust with the candidate is probably most dear to me. I think it's something that you can do from the very beginning, and it sets the tone for the relationship you and your candidate will have moving through the interview process, whether it ends in an offer or a rejection. Even from just starting your initial call with them, going over what the call will entail, letting them know that they can ask questions, and setting expectations for the interview process moving forward is something that's not difficult to do. It's something every recruiter should do, and there's really nothing better to set yourself up for success with a candidate, because they're going to be much more likely to be open and honest about their interview process and what they're looking for if you're setting that tone from the very beginning. Sending personalized emails is the next that they recommend. We talked about it before. It's easier to do if you're not as high volume. However, it's always easy to do if you're deeper in the interview process with a candidate, because chances are you have a better relationship with them. You've spoken with them on multiple occasions. And from a candidate's perspective, if you've dedicated the time to speak with a recruiter several times, you've set time aside to do interviews, the last thing that you should be getting is an automated email with no personality in it to tell you you were either not a match for the role or even what the next steps are in the interview process. These are all things that even I would recommend would be good to do with a phone call, especially if you're at lower volume, because you likely have the time to set aside to speak with different candidates. And it also gives you the opportunity, again, to update yourself on the other interview processes that they may be having going on with different companies. This strategy is to be as clear as you can about the process with candidates. This is something we mentioned before. It's very important to make sure you're setting proper expectations beyond just the process, but compensation range, what the job will entail, pretty much anything you can be transparent about, you should be transparent about. And you should set the expectation for these things as soon as you can, which means the very first phone call you have with a candidate. The less recruiters think about candidates as a means to fill a job, the better you'll be at forming relationships with candidates and having their trust throughout the process. This last strategy is engaging with candidates on social media. I think this is extremely important. I usually like to stick with LinkedIn because it is a professional network and people expect to be reached out to for opportunities over LinkedIn. So if you're emailing a candidate, it's always great to follow up with a LinkedIn message and a connection. That way, if you've gotten their email wrong, you know that they'll at least be getting your LinkedIn message, and you can hopefully connect with them that way. Also, they point out that you should make sure you're responding to any messages that you get over social media, especially LinkedIn. I highly recommend, even if it's just email, to always respond to messages as soon as you can, because otherwise it's just going to get put on the back burner and it's going to add up responsibility that you're going to have to eventually do anyways. So it's best to just take care of it at that time. So this has been 10 communication strategies to better engage candidates from the website RecruitingDaily.com. Again, I'll have it listed in the description below so you can check it out for yourself. I wanted to make sure I highlighted it because there's a lot of great information there. And as you can tell, the majority of these strategies have to do with open communication with candidates, making sure that you're respecting them, keeping them informed, and setting proper expectations throughout the process. These are all great ways to maintain awesome relationships with your candidates. If you got into the recruiting industry, that should be something that you strive to do. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel. We're starting to grow, which has been great to see. I've been enjoying making these videos. I'd love to continue. Your support is greatly appreciated. I thank everyone for returning or visiting for the first time. We'll see you for the next one.